Stan Kasten spoke at a Sports Business Journal conference and might have spilt some tea when it comes to what's coming up for the PWHL.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by the Locked On NHL channel and a part of, the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the reporting on women's hockey every single Saturday. Erica L. Ayala here. I am also the host of Locked On Kraken. I am joined, as always, by Rachel Donner, who is one of your hosts of the Locked On NHL Friday episode, along with Gil Martin, and of course, your co-host of Locked On Flyers, Rachel. We got a bit of news, as one of our other hockey podcasts might say, but I've been around Allison Lucan for a few days, so
love her.
That's right, Too Many Men Pod. Go check it out. But we got a bit of news, and Sports Business Journal had Stan Kasten, who often is the spokesperson for the PWHL, of course, and he not only dropped some nuggets about season tickets, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but maybe more importantly, Rachel, he said, quote, "We are going to be adding more teams much sooner than other people thought because the demand is there. The players are there." I definitely have some thoughts about that last piece in particular, but we'll get into that. Let's just first talk about the PWHL expanding. We also know from the reporting in the conference at SBJ that season tickets looking great, specifically for Seattle and Vancouver. So it does seem like the first two expansion teams, Rachel, are proving their proof of concept, right? Which is maybe why Casten decided to drop this news. But what do you make of this, that the PWHL not done expanding? And when do you think is sooner, quote, sooner than people think?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because expansion is a delicate process. Now, sometimes it moves faster than people want. Sometimes it moves slower than people want, WNBA. But I think that, there is an art and a science to it. And especially when it comes to not only the player pool that we're talking about, but you need to have coaching staff, you need to have operations staff, you need to have officials, you need the pool of officials to be big enough to support a bigger league and more games. So there's like more to it than just what cities are ready and are willing to plunk down their credit card, to buy season tickets. There's a lot of logistics and a lot of factors to consider here. And so, I want this league to expand and I want it to be successful, but I do want them to do it in the right way.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about it even on the last episode. We started talking a little bit about what does it mean that, we have these expansion teams in Vancouver and Seattle, and they weren't given much prep time on when they could have their players back in market to even prepare for what I would imagine is a pretty important first training camp. And so a lot of these players are coming from other teams, but they've never played together. That's kind of the whole thing about an expansion team, right? And we know, as people who are in the midst of covering preseason and training camp for NHL teams, that stuff matters. Even the NHL, there's conversation on whether the preseason is maybe too short, and really not preseason, more the training camp. Training camp is not actually that long. I think teams have found ways to finagle it to make it a little bit longer, like rookie portion of camp and things of that nature, where they know the veteran guys are going to come in. But again, I digress. If we talk about women's hockey here, the ecosystem doesn't exist for that because the schedule is not set. I guess I should say maybe the players and the teams know the schedule. But the indications that I was getting, at least from Seattle, when Ava and I were both at that season ticket holder event, I guess a month or two now, is that even if there were some inklings, things were still moving targets. I think is the safest way I'll say it, because when we're working with PR teams for these expansion groups, I knew I was going to be in Seattle for Seattle Kraken camp, and it made sense that if there was overlap, and it potentially there could have been, right? Or even if the players were just going to be in market, like, even media people, we want to plan for that.
Yeah. And I think that especially with these two new expansion teams, right? We knew Vancouver Canadian market, there was going to be some natural enthusiasm there anyway. And the ticket sales were going to be there. Like, there just wasn't a question. And with Seattle, as obviously, they just went through this expansion process on the men's side only a few years ago.
Right.
So kind of the hype for another new team and knowing how established the women's sports market is in Seattle, like, it is not a shock to me that their season tickets sales were really high. And right. Especially when you have the soccer team and the basketball team playing opposite season to hockey, the opportunity was going to be there. And that's why these two cities were chosen.
100%. And you mentioned, in a way, you mentioned the Seattle Storm. Oh, what a heartbreaking game against Vegas. Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
I know.
I was at the Heim show watching in between the opener and Heim. And I was just like, okay, I was like, I need a minute after that game. But, what was an up and down season, they gave us a thriller to end. But anyway, just wanted to put that out there. But to your point, yes, these cities are ready. The fans are ready. But there's another part in there, Rachel, that I wanted to come back to, because there have been times in women's hockey, women's hockey history, that we've been told that the talent pool isn't large enough to sustain multiple teams, more than 6-ish, 8-ish. We've had up to 12, upwards of 12 or 13 women's pro teams at a time, whether that was in one league or in two leagues. Right. But that's what we've been told for the better half of 5-7 years. And that's probably being conservative. It's gone longer than that. And so for now, in what is going to be season 3, for the PWHL to declare that they can expand quicker, and part of that is because of the player pool, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, we've been saying that for a while.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, there's two factors. There's the player pool writ large, in general. And then there's the player pool on the existing teams and the gut-wrenching expansion process we just went through, and forcing fan bases to go through that again so quickly to redistribute that player pool, right? And so you have the existing player pool, although that is slowly dwindling in terms of existing players that aren't in the pro game, coupled with always like new up and coming college players that are graduating and adding to that player pool as well. And then you have your retirees on the other end, which we've talked about as well. But I think the numbers coming in are definitely still greater than the numbers leaving at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the other thing to maybe consider here is that you mentioned the fan bases, right? And upending fan bases. I think another part of this is that I think you could argue that the PWHL is offering sustainability, yes, in ways that perhaps other leagues haven't, but that's not necessarily financially, at least not yet. And so if expansion keeps coming, which means that players keep moving, that's huge, right? And are these players' salaries sustainable and livable? And some people will say, well, a hockey player is not playing year round. But if you want them to play in the hockey season and you want them to be healthy in the hockey season, and this is a conversation we have on the WNBA side, even in the soccer side.
Support them year round.
You have to support them year round. Or what are they going to do, Rachel? They're going to play in other leagues. And then what we see is that, whatever the main league or usually the US based league then doesn't want them playing elsewhere, but also the model or the the ownership is not willing to put up the money then to, again, make it so that this is their full-time commitment when it comes to hockey. Of course, international play with national teams being the outlier, but that's understandable, I think. So, I mean, I think there's so much to this conversation, and I'm excited to get into it. I think it's really cool also, if I'm being honest, that the PWHL continues to be a part of, or women's sports overall. We've seen an uptick in them being not only invited, but being featured panels at these sports business events. And I think that's a huge sign of growth. We've seen the PWHL a few times announce kind of upcoming things, whether it was the RFP, over a year ago now, or now that expansion is coming quicker. We're seeing them utilize this as kind of like ways to drop news. So I think that's great as well. And then, of course, Rachel, there's the part of this where there are some cities that are going to be making a case for the PWHL to come swing by their way. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
The NFL season is underway, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I like using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether you're into player props or building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live during games as the action unfolds to make those spot bets. It's quick, it's easy, it's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. And I'm really excited because I'm actually going to the NFL Europe game over in Dublin to see Vikings Steelers, and I might put some money on the Vikings to win this one, much to the chagrin of my Pittsburgh Steeler family. But it is definitely something to look forward to. Are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place that first $5 bet.
Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you on the NHL channel, but you can also tap in with us directly, whether it's on Blue Sky. Rachel and I both on Blue Sky. You can check out our handles either on the screen or in the show notes, but you can find the show on TikTok. That's right. Women's_hockey_report. And we curate all of our content just from this show. Although if you do enjoy some of our men's hockey talk, including Rachel with Gil on Fridays, and of course, make sure you subscribe to the Locked On NHL channel, whether that's on YouTube or on your audio platform of choice. And then you'll just know that on Saturdays, you'll get the Women's Hockey Report. All right, Rachel, we talked about expansion. We know we've got 2 expansion teams coming in. Those were the last 2 teams as part of our deep dive series. But sounds like Stan's leaving the door open, as Bruno Mars might sing, for some other teams. And so this gives us the opportunity. We talked about some of the questions, right, that we have about this announcement and the timing of expansion, how that's going to impact players. But the other side of this is that maybe you find cities where there's already a big pocket of women's hockey players. There's some that come to mind just because of whether it's, big hockey programs, especially in the NCAA, or just, schools that kind of have, situations where players just end up going back there and living there, training sites for national teams. There are hotspots for sure. I think most of them have been tapped out through what we have already, but there are some cities, I think, Rachel, that would make a case like, oh, hey, we're ready for women's hockey too. We talked about them on the show before, including even just last week where we talked about Quebec City a little bit. And I think they are hoping that if expansion comes soon, which to me soon would be like they announced that they're going to expand again next year. That would be super soon for me. But
big concerns about that, to be honest.
Yeah, but Quebec has seemed like they're ready and a little put out, a little miffed, right, that they weren't a part of the first two expansions. Do you think that they should be at the top of the list?
I mean, there's so many factors, right? Because it made sense to have Seattle and Vancouver come into the league together because of the geography of it. It builds the rivalry and, all of those factors in terms of, travel costs. And Quebec City, one of the reasons, in my opinion, why they've struggled to add it back into the NHL, even though there may be a market for it there, is where does it fit divisionally, and how does that upset the apple cart of all of that, right? And so I think for me, Quebec City gets a team when they split into two divisions, when they're at the point where they're going to split, because then I think it would make sense because you could group them with Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto, if you're going to do a Canadian division or like however they're going to work that. I ultimately think Quebec City gets in when they split into two conferences or divisions.
So I guess that begs the question then, when is that? Because we are going to have 8 teams playing this season. We've seen the WNBA, although they did move away from conferences for a little bit, I think for different reasons, but they've had conferences with primarily working with 12 teams. So do you need another 4, Rachel, you think? And then even if it's anywhere from 2, right, Quebec and another team, to upwards of 4, Quebec and 3 other teams, what do they have to be U.S. Split evenly between the U.S. and Canada? I mean, I don't know. These are
a lot of politics around that, I'm sure. I mean, like from a business perspective, what makes sense, from a player pool perspective, what makes sense, because I think all of those bigger conversations that we talked about in the first segment of where's your player pool coming from? Are we going to get more European imports? Like, is it going to be more U.S. based because of the NCAA essentially being the minor league of this league, right? Mm-hmm. And, are we going to have that conversation about a minor league, pro league for the women's pro hockey here instead of having practice players? Like, all of that feeds into the expansion conversation, because, if you're thinking that you want a team in, let's just say, a Detroit, which makes a lot of sense to me, you have to pair it with another Midwestern team because of the geography situation, because of the finances of the league as they currently stand, and the way the league is being constructed as it currently stands. And I also think you have to think about the players and where they're going to want to live, where they're going to be willing to live, because the balance of power in the league right now is a little bit with the players, as far as, players like, I'm not going to play for this team because I can't live there, right? That's going to shift. It's naturally going to shift a little bit. And again, with the European players, what factor does that play in all of this? So, because are they going to want to only play on the East Coast? There's a lot to it. And so I do think it's a bigger conversation than the fan base, but there's certainly a lot of good ones to choose from. That's the good part of all this.
Right. And so if you look at it, thinking about where Quebec is as far as close catchment areas to the United States, I mean, Maine is literally right there, but I'm not sure Maine is high on the list when it comes to expansion. So then you have, of course, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts.
That's when Buffalo comes back into the conversation, right?
That's where I was getting to. Yeah, Connecticut, right below, Massachusetts. Then you have Rhode Island, maybe, but then yes, you can cut over to Buffalo, and so not close. It wouldn't be the closest team to Quebec City, but then Montreal, Ottawa, and you then have a connection also directly there to Toronto. So Buffalo could make some sense. You mentioned Detroit, Ohio, Cleveland specifically, Michigan. I mean, if there's going to be an equitable split, which I think is also interesting, Rachel, right? Because the national broadcast is in Canada. One does not exist in the United States. And so I was actually speaking to one of our listeners at Kraken Camp. Shout out to Striatic. And another thing that we were talking about just in passing, thinking about Seattle and maybe why Seattle got picked, something that I mentioned to Striatic was, Well, I wonder if the regional broadcast had anything to do with that. By that, I mean that the Seattle Kraken switched their model or switched their regional broadcast rights holder. And that's been a big thing that we've talked about over on Locked On Kraken. But if you look at, the teams in the United States, Minnesota, with, I guess is it still Bally? I know they changed in certain areas. Well, whatever.
They did.
Yeah. So Minnesota, Nesson in Boston, I think New York taps into MSG every once in a while.
Yep.
And so would it make sense? And will we were guessing this more for Seattle, but will Seattle, the PWHL team, tap into the regional broadcast that the Kraken is using? And is that why they wanted to have a partnership with the Kraken? Does that work for both parties? But then what would that look like, again, if we're talking about expansion? Is that high on the priority list? And I just don't know. I don't think we know, but I think that has to be a part of it, because if you break down who the expansion teams are, I mean, there are some similarities, especially on the U.S. side, on what these teams have. And a lot of that has to do with regional broadcasts and how professional hockey on the men's side is already disseminated in those areas.
Yeah, I think all of that is something to think about, because I think that we can't really have a conversation about equality between the US and Canadian markets until there's a broadcast agreement in place. And I think that there's good things and bad things that come with that broadcast agreement, right? Because the bad thing is probably the YouTube goes away, right?
I don't know, because the Swedish League has leaned into it as a way, because you have to think, and you mentioned international players. We talked about it last week, that we're seeing some players go back to Europe. Stan Kasten seemed to address that by saying that maybe this is a short-term thing, and that it's certain players wanting to be maybe closer to their national team hub in an Olympic season, which I think does make some sense. But also,
of course,
if you're going to continue to attract that talent and you don't want to lose them, even in Olympic years, a part of that is making sure that they can tap into a fan base that is willing to watch them if they're able to outside of North America.
Correct. And, obviously there's geo-locking so that you can put the games on YouTube for people outside of North America to watch, but you have to have a subscription in North America to watch. That's and all of that. Yeah. But I think that, you do have to balance the accessibility and the community aspect of the YouTube with having the up-leveling of a broadcast agreement that creates the revenue to allow you to do more for the league, right?
Yes.
And including expansion to some of these markets. So yes. I think that the local broadcast agreements and a national broadcasting agreement work hand in hand, just like they do in most sports, right? Where most of the games are broadcast on the local sports channel, but you have some national games sprinkled in. And I think that's the way to go in the US right now. And that's where I think there's room for it. Whether it's, in Detroit or Chicago or even.
Hey, we reported my LinkedIn reporting that the PWHL has landed in Chicago over the summer. So, could that be a team that helps, bridge the gap or gives you another market? We know they have an NHL team, great regional market when it comes to all of those things. The reporters are very dedicated in a market like Chicago. So that's something else to think about. But, I think that you talked about
Denver. I think it obviously is another one of those really good options.
Do you think the Mammoth are looking for, looking for some no.
I mean,
no.
I will say, as somebody who played in a women's hockey league, a very good women's hockey league in Utah, there's definitely an audience and a hunger for it on the playing side. I don't know on the fan side of things at the moment. I think they need to build the Mammoth side of things first for a little while. But Denver, I think, is right there.
I could see Denver for sure. Well, only time will tell, Rachel, but you mentioned YouTube. And at least for now, not only can you find PWHL games throughout the season, but the league announced an interesting way to interact with fans. And we will talk about that coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. You know, as Effie Trinket would say, welcome back to the Women's Hockey Report. Third segment here. We've already talked about some news. Stan Kasten dropping that maybe we're going to see expansion sooner than you think because the fan base is there and the players are there. Then, of course, we talked about Rachel. Well, where could the PWHL potentially go, as well as what are some questions that we'd still like to have answered. But the PWHL has some questions for fans, Rachel, as they have put out an ask and are starting to do a PWHL rewind. That's right, re-airing on YouTube, the aforementioned YouTube, some of the games from the last few seasons. And I like this. I've partaken in some of my independent podcasts and even having some athletes on to just like break down like what were some games or seasons about. Like, I think rewinds are always so much fun, and I kind of like that the league is doing this.
I really do too. I think it continues to maintain the community that's been built over on YouTube. There's like a lingo and like a way of interacting in the chat over there that it's like pretty unique and fun. And I think to continue that and to like start rebuilding it prior to the actual season is really smart of them to do. And, you know, and it gets newer fans who maybe are now into it because of Seattle and Vancouver that didn't watch the games last season. It gives them an opportunity to kind of get caught up on, like, that's what you missed on Glee, right?
I love it. Yeah, I think this is really great. And, you know, the league has also put out some little surveys and they have, you know, sometimes questions and a poll, if you will, onto what games they should rewind and re-air next, which got us thinking, Rachel. And, you know, I know you have a list of some games that are on the top for you. And honestly, like, I didn't really need to, I think you kind of nailed it. So what is the top game for you when it comes to a rewind that you would like to partake in?
So the league has done their first rewatch after their first poll, and this was of the inaugural game of the PWHL, which was smart and the right way to kick this off. Yeah. And I would have put that on my list had they not already done it. Just want to make that clear. So PWHL fans were spot on with their first selection there. But I know it's kind of a slog in some ways, but I feel like everybody who didn't go through it needs to go through it. So this is like for all the other PWHL fans out there, you need to watch the entirety of the 4 overtime playoff game between Montreal and Ottawa. Like, live through it, like eat the fruit and crap, like be amazed at how these players are standing on their skates even and getting up and down the ice after the first overtime. Of course, Catherine Dubois scored for Montreal with 4:27 left in that quadruple overtime to beat Ottawa 3-2, but Ottawa wound up going on to the final in the playoffs anyway. So like, we know, but I think for me, like, that is a communal experience worth having again, despite how long it is.
Yeah. And if you make it through that, then I feel like anyone who makes it through that is going to want to watch that entire series, because the entire series gave us nail-biting hockey. And I freaking loved it, to the point where we talked about it last week, where, you know, Montreal might be trying to figure out a way to manage and finagle their salary cap in order to, I would imagine, Rachel, be the most competitive they can be, so that even if it does take a 1-4 overtime game, that they're on the winning side, at least of the series. But again, you can listen back to that episode from last week where we talk about Marie-Philippe Poulin. Is it fair or foul that she's taking this salary cut, and, or is salary cut even the right terminology? But we talked about that last week. Go check it out. All right. What else is on the list? So we've talked about, of course, inaugural game. I said April 1 for some reason while you're talking about, I meant January 1. I was actually here in Seattle for that and very gutted and had lots of FOMO, but I love that was a rewatch. What else do you have on here?
I would say the first Walter Cup championship clinching game in season 1 between PWHL Minnesota, as it was known at the time, and PWHL Boston. That 3-0 win. It was kind of disappointing from the Boston side of things, but I think I'm going to say this with all the love in the world. It would help Boston fans get used to the disappointment that this upcoming season might experience for them.
Burn.
But I know it was very heartbreaking for them, and I honestly, I did not expect Boston to go down like that in that game in that first season. But it's a little retro with the original monikers for the names, and the energy was just unbelievable for that first championship. So I think that would be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. You also have on here 8-goal game, Ottawa over Minnesota. And that was at a time where we had been talking about it, just like on the struggle bus. I saw that some of our colleagues in media have a list of players on the coaches on the hot seat. And we were talking, hot might be an understatement for Carla McLeod at points last year is what it felt like. And then you get a performance like that, Rachel. I agree with you. Instant classic in a team that, they would go on to see, wink, wink, spoiler alert, in the final.
Right.
But I thought that was a huge turning point-ish for Ottawa.
Right. And it's a regular season game, which is great to make sure there's more regular season games in the mix. And, it's the most goals scored in a game up until that point. And so, you have a lot of goals. So that makes a rewatch a lot of fun. And yeah, the narrative between Ottawa and Minnesota, right now, especially given how the final went this year, it's high. The animosity is high. So to go back and revisit it, but from a regular season perspective, I think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I love this last one that you have on the list because it really speaks to, in a very direct way, the unique elements of the PWHL. And it involves two teams that we haven't really talked about yet in Toronto and New York.
Yeah, this is partially my attempt to get some other teams in the mix here because it's very Minnesota and Ottawa heavy here, but they've put on a great show. So more power to them. But in January of 2024, we experienced the very first jailbreak goal in PWHL history. Emma Malte scoring it for Toronto in a win over PWHL New York at the time. And it's wild to me, again, with the older names. I had forgotten in the little score bug, it said NYC and not just NY because it's different. It's little, but I was just like, oh, all right, they did that. They really did that. No, but it was such a moment because this rule was something that was really innovative and exciting and fun. And so to see it actually come to fruition was really cool.
100%. I think as you were talking through them, the only other things that I would add on the list is probably for the vibes and for the girlies, CJ's first start. Which I believe was also on a Pride night, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was a good one when Toronto honored Erica Howe, who has been battling cancer. That was a very emotional game. I think of also my gal, Teresa Vanishova, when she got into it with Jill Saunier, that has become
That's a good
part
one.
of, PWHL, at least
it's the lore. It's part of the lore.
It's definitely a part of the social lore. I think that's a huge one. Natalie Spooner, anything Natalie Spooner from season 1, basically. She crushed it after coming back into pro hockey, being a mom, huge MVP of that first season. I mean, there's so many moments, right? And I'm looking forward to seeing what games PWHL fans are really eager to rewatch.
Yeah, I think we'll see on Monday what the next set of games to choose from is in their voting, and then we'll get another game on Thursday night.
There you go. So if they picked any of the ones from this show, then we know that people from the league listen. We're taking credit. I mean, whatever, it's fine. But that'll do, Rachel, for our show. So next week, we are expecting to have a few more guests alongside us. Both Rachel and I are traveling. So we will have a show, don't worry, but you might see some new to this show faces, but definitely not new to women's hockey and to being a part of with the PWHL on social media. Wink, wink. Yes, maybe someone that you've seen do a deep dive with us for PWHL Seattle. But that's exciting. Rachel and I, of course, are so honored to be your hosts here for the Women's Hockey Report. And we see your comments. We know that you are wanting us to continue to grow this show. Yes, we appreciate you. We are continuing to advocate to create more spaces that are just for this show, and ways that you're helping is with your comments, not just about that, but just comments on the show overall, engaging with us on social media. It helps us make a case, just like Stan Kasten did at the Sports Business Journal conference, that not only is the PWHL ready to expand, but PWHL and women's hockey shows are ready for their own space as well. So keep it up. And if there are things that you want to see that we need to talk about more, we've even had people recommend guests, please, by all means, we want to engage with you. But for Rachel Donner, I am Erica L. Ayala, and we will catch you next Saturday on another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. Until then, enjoy your week. Peace out, everybody.